Ready to rock and roll? Everybody is here. Woot! Good job, school board. All right. Jeremy, ready? Everybody ready? All right, let's do this. Good evening. My name is Jennifer Preble, and the Saco School Board Chair. I'm calling this meeting to order on this Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. Would you please note that all school board members are in attendance? Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. All right, moving on to item 3. We are looking at approval of school board meeting minutes dated November 13th, 2024. Do I have a motion?
Chair Preble.
School board member Truman.
I move we approve the school board meeting minutes dated November 13th, 2024.
All right, I have a motion by school board member Truman. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by school board member Johnston. Any discussion on the meeting minutes for November 13th, 2024? Seeing no one is seeking discussion, move on to roll call vote. School board member Warnoff.
Approve.
School board member Richards.
Yes.
I vote yes. School board member Roach.
Yes.
School board member Kidder. Abstain. Bear with me a second. School board member Truman.
Yep.
And school board member Johnston.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 6 with 1 abstention. Okay, got it. All right, moving on to item 4, adjustments in the agenda. I don't think there's any adjustments that I'm aware of this evening. All right, moving on to item 5, correspondence. I was not made aware of any correspondence this evening. So we can move right on to item 6, which is public session. Please feel free to come before the school board and state your name and address for the record. You have 3 minutes to speak, and thank you. Okay, seeing as nobody is seeking recognition for public session, we can move right on to item 7, the superintendent's report. Superintendent Ray, take us away.
All right. Is that kind of like Calgon, take us away, or one of those things? Yeah, dating myself from a commercial, I guess.
I do like Calgon.
Couple of different things. First and foremost, we entered our weather season for school cancellations or delays the other morning, and I'm not sure that what I see outside will make, hopefully, powers everywhere in the morning time for us. We'll certainly have to go around and check schools first thing and see what's going on. But it's always important for parents to make sure that we have updated cell phone numbers and email addresses, because when those calls go out in the morning time, our ability to call is only as good as the information that we have in our student records. In addition to that, for people who may have gotten a call and said, well, I don't have a kid in the system, why would I get this call? It's important to remember that cell phone numbers sometimes are recycled from people who were in our system, and then a new cell phone number comes and they give that out again. And so if you were someone in the public who got a call and said, hey, I don't want to hear from Meg Parkhurst at 5 a.m. in the morning, just give us a call so that we can search our system and see which student that is tagged to. So just very important pieces for us as we think about winter operations. As you know, we started the school year with kind of a back-to-school theme based off Survivor TV show, and we've been trying to carry that out throughout the year. All of our schools have quickly, well, some were a little longer than others, found their hidden immunity idols that we put out there, and our staffs are going through their group rewards that they have made it through. And I know that we had bagel bar the other day at Wendy's school. We had a cookout lunch. I know we've got a pizza party coming up, and we're scheduling those out into all of our departments. Our transportation department wanted a Sunday party, an ice cream Sunday party. So that's going out as we start to think about our winter gifts before the holiday seasons to our staff members. They will continue around that survivor-based theme, and we'll continue to do that throughout the year of, what our I will give a clue, comfort items that you may want back at camp. And so it's just been a lot of fun to try to keep that going a little bit throughout the year, and we'll have some other fun things that come out in the next quarter. I want to say thank you to the Girl Scout Troop 1274, comprised of 11 students at C.K. Burns School, who donated $904 to their art teacher to purchase essential art supplies for schools. Students raised the money by hosting bake sales at the Pumpkin Festival as part of their Journey Agent of Change Leadership Award. And I really want to thank you to that group for recognizing and donating to the school. That's a great thing. Each and every year throughout our community, especially at this time of year, many organizations step up and help fund many different items. And specifically, I want to thank the Biddeford Saco Rotary Club and the Rotary Clubs in the area for their continued support of adopting nearly 200 students between Biddeford and Saco to brighten the Christmas season. That's a pretty big task, and the number grows. And then just also the number of staff people and staff members that step up to help in that drive. Additionally, we tend to get calls several times a week from other organizations, something like Knights of Columbus or things like that will just say, hey, do you need boots? Do you need hats? Do you need mittens, clothing? What other supplies that you need? And sometimes it's great when they come and they meet with us because they may have one idea of what needs are when really we may be experiencing something. Sometimes certain needs rise up from time to time, and that's just something that we're thankful for. You may have gotten stopped in traffic the other morning when Reese Across America made it through down Route 1 for several of us and made the start of the school day a little bit more challenging that morning. But National Wreaths Across America Day will be held Saturday, December 14th, in which volunteers will be laying wreaths to honor our veterans. If you're interested in doing that at some of the local cemeteries, you can sign up at Wreaths Across America website. 7 school days left until our winter vacation starts, so that's just around the corner. And so other than that, that's my update for this evening. Entertain any questions.
Any questions for Superintendent Ray? School Board Member Roach?
Is Meg's voice an angry voice at 5 in the morning, or is it happy? Sure, let's experiment.
I can vouch that it's actually quite pleasant.
I find it to be much more pleasant when I answer the Saco call than when I answer the Biddeford and Dayton one, and it's actually me.
And you're like, what?
I was like, who's that on the end of the phone? But that's always just, I think for the public, what people don't necessarily realize about that is a fairly intense 30 minutes of the of the morning of that starts at that 4:30 news, and I'm working the cell phone and chatting with probably up to 10 different superintendents throughout the regions. You're talking with police force, road crews, and usually that decision to cancel school is done in about a 20-minute period of time, and then it's getting that information out of making sure that all facilities crews know what's going on, making sure all principals know what's going on, communicating with the central office team to say, okay, who's doing the phone calls, who's doing the messages, who's handling Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those pieces, who calls, you still have to call all of the television stations. And what people don't realize is that you would think that they would have one integrated system where you could put in one code, but they don't. You have a password and code to every single one of the stations that is different. And so we do that for 3 And then as soon as that decision or before that decision is made, we're communicating with Thornton Academy and the headmaster and their ground crew, both of our transportation networks. So it's a pretty intense 30 minutes, and then your phone rings for the next 45 minutes with everybody's continuing to call and do those things. So if anyone wants that experience on a snowstorm, just come over to the house at 4:30 in the morning and we can set you in on that piece.
School Board Member Truman?
Quick question on that same vein. Have we integrated into the Better system, or are you still doing an hour of hell? No, we're in the Better system. Okay, that's fantastic. I was hoping that you guys weren't up at 4:30, like, typing it out and putting in the...
It's a much better system now that is,
Right.
you know, the piece is that there's no integration or drop down where in that system where I could select each and every school department and have them all, it's still all log into each one, all Twitter feed, all of those pieces. And everybody on the team has a certain role in that morning time once the decision's made. And I think the other morning we were in pretty good shape because 5 o'clock the information was out and the phone was ringing. So that was a good one.
Definitely woke me up the other morning. It was wonderful, though. Okay. Any other questions for Superintendent Ray? All right. Moving on to item 8, which is the chair's report. And I think it's already on the agenda, but just saying we're going to review going over voting for officers, chair, vice chair nominations this evening further down the agenda, and also looking at committee assignments and liaison assignments. So any questions about that? Okay, moving on to item 9, staff reports. I did not see any staff reports listed this evening. So we can absolutely move on to item 10, which is board subcommittee meeting minutes. I believe the Policy and Personnel Committee was canceled this evening and will be rescheduled at a future date into January. Our Finance and Infrastructure Committee meeting, our next meeting is January 29th at 4:30 p.m. In our Curriculum Committee, our next meeting is November 25th. I'm sorry, that was the meeting minutes for it. Next meeting will be January 27th at 4:30 p.m. Any questions around the board subcommittee meeting minutes or the next meeting times? All right. Since there's no questions, moving on to item 11, old business. I don't really have anything listed for that category, so we can move right into item, I'm sorry, that was item 11. Moving on to item 12, new business. Item A, new hires. There is a memo in your packet, and I have that no motion is needed on that this evening. Any questions on that? Okay. Moving on to resignations, there is also a memo in your packet. Superintendent Ray, do we need a motion on this one? No, just informational? Okay. For review. Then we can move right on to item C, which is the Saco NWEA Fall 2024 data. Assistant Superintendent Parkhurst, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. You moved so efficiently through the meeting. It is preparing.
No worries. No worries.
Yay.
It'll all be worth it when we can see it. Perfect.
Okay, so this evening I'd like to walk you through some of the information from our fall administration of NWEA's measures of academic progress. Some of the introductory information will be a repeat for many of you, but I think it's important for anyone listening to hear some of the repeated information about the standardization of the test, the timing, et cetera, as well as our 2 new board members who may not have had the pleasure of hearing those portions prior. So the measures of academic progress includes 2 assessments in math and in reading. This year we've administered those assessments in grades 1 through 8. In the past, we had not administered the reading assessment in first grade. We had started that in second grade because we had some other assessments, but we felt like the continuation of that data over a longer period of time was helpful. So we did include our first graders as a pilot last year in the reading assessment and then included them all this year in that assessment. We administer this 3 times a year. It's a slightly different test in the fall and the spring than it is in the winter. There are more adaptive questions in the winter than there are in the fall and the spring. The fall and the spring include more grade level questions, but also have an adaptive measure as well. The students then receive a score that is normed against national norms. So they don't necessarily spit out a score that says whether a child is at grade level or not, though Maine has created a scale that kind of associates with the scale. What they do is create a score that compares to students at that grade level across the country and says whether they're in which percentile. So think of it as when you go to your pediatrician and you see where your child's height and weight is, you're really looking to see if they're following the same trajectory, because if they're in the 25th percentile, you wouldn't expect them to jump into the 75th percentile, but you might want to be seeing if they're at least following that trajectory in the 25th and or moving slowly in the case of this kind of assessment beyond that, as we want, of course, all students to make at least a year's growth in a year's time, especially for those students that might be below our benchmarks. It's also important to note that the normative data, so when we compare today's scores to those percentiles are not every student that took the test nationally this fall. We're still using normative data from 2015 to 2020, which is all pre-COVID data. And the studies that they've put out since that time have shown that there have been declines in those scores everywhere since COVID. And so that means that we're still comparing our averages to the averages that were determined with the pre-COVID normative data. And then another important thing to understand is just the difference between norm referenced, which NWEA now kind of straddles these two, but I still like to talk about the differences between the two. A norm referenced assessment is simply saying if you gave this test to a number of people, what is the bell curve or non-bell curve that would occur as with those results, and then where would each student fall on that curve in terms of their score. It is also adaptive, so the test is actually designed for students to get 50% of the questions correct, because as you answer questions correctly, you're getting additional questions that are above the grade level that you're in, and if you are getting questions incorrect, it then knocks it down, and it's doing that consistently throughout the assessment to try to find that like sweet spot of where you are going to be to get 50% right and 50% wrong. A standards referenced assessment, which the one that we take at the end of the year includes more grade level questions, is one that I think we think of as a traditional assessment where like at the end of fourth grade, every student needs to take a test that has only fourth grade questions on it to see if they pass the content that we teach in fourth grade. So though that spring assessment has more of those questions on it, it also still has some adaptive questions. So I think it's just important for us to keep in mind that when we look at these percentiles, of course we want high achievement scores and we always want to be increasing our achievement scores, but this isn't a scenario in which you can have everybody above average, so to speak. So the two things that we're going to look at are cohort growth over time, though it's important to note that when we look at a cohort like the class of 2030, that class may not be the same exact group of students, but it's a little bit better to compare that class over time than it is to just look at first grade over time, which is a totally different group of kids each year. So there is some consistency in the groups moving forward. And then we'll look at the average historic scores as well. So to begin with reading, this just shows in that fall assessment the percent of kids in each performance band, and down the left side in the yellow, you'll see the median percentile ranking. So you can see that the median achievement for all of our grade levels is just above average. And then we have variance, of course, grade level to grade level in terms of whether we have a larger band in that below the 20th percentile or how it's distributed across each of those percentile bands per grade level. And here you can see those cohorts over time. The small X or gray line in each of these graphs shows that 50th percentile or mean RIT score. The RIT score is the score that is spit out for each student. So we've taken the average per grade level and just compared that to the national average. So our first grade students in reading are slightly above average. Second grade, you can see where they were in the spring of first grade and then where they are in the fall of second grade, and that pattern follows. So just to kind of get a sense of what each of these means, when we see that gap close between, if we're starting below that mean score from one year to the next, we want to see that gap get smaller between our mean and the national norm. And if we were already over that, we're looking to increase that gap. That shows that we're growing more than a year's growth in a year's time. And if our distance between our score and the X is the same, that means the average is growing a year's growth in a year's time. So on this chart, our fourth grade is our only grade on here where we had a discrepancy in kind of falling below where our achievement was relative to the mean from last spring. And here you can see 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Our 5th and 6th grade were pretty consistent in terms of their scores from last spring, with 7th and 8th grade closing that gap a little bit towards that median or national average. And this shows over time the average scores in terms of how above or below the 50th percentile all of our grade levels were from spring of 2018 all the way through to fall of 2024. So just to summarize a couple of the key points, the median scores are above the national median in all grade levels. Our growth is below average from fall to fall for all grades, but when we look at that spring to fall, we did have some good scores there, more than we would expect to see. Across all grade levels, vocabulary is the strongest sub-score, which is a pretty interesting pattern to see when you see like something that's that consistent over every grade level. It tends to mean that it does have something to do with what we're doing in our classrooms more systemically. And foundational skills is something that's only measured in our K2 assessment for reading, and that was the weakest sub-score area by like a pretty recognizable difference in second grade, so we will definitely be looking at that and have spoken a little bit about that in our curriculum committee as well. In our schools, we do review individual student scores, including growth over time for individual students. We look at the sub-scores for individuals as well as grade level bands and classrooms to try to determine if there are specific strengths or weaknesses that we could either capitalize on or remedy. And then also looking at those from a curricular standpoint to see if there are shifts that we need to make in our instructional resources and practices to support areas that might need additional support. Taking a look at math, we have a similar picture in terms of achievement, with only one grade level falling below in the 44th percentile in 5th grade. And again, you can see that distribution is pretty different grade level to grade level in terms of what portion of students we have falling along those bands, from the lowest 20th percentile to the top 20th percentile in the blue. And here we have the bar graphs to just show over time where our achievement is, with those X's representing the national norm and the bar representing Saco's average score. And here we show that same data for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Good data, again, for our 7th and 8th graders in terms of kind of closing that gap a bit from prior testing as compared to the national average. And here you can see that over time score again, and certainly in both the reading and the math, you can still see that pre-COVID, post-COVID, those scores are not, we have not recovered from that, but we are kind of still growing kids a year's rate at a year's time from where they were. That's where we are at that average, but we're not at the achievement levels that we were prior to COVID. So as I shared, all grades except for the current 5th grade are at or above the national median. Growth was close to average from fall to fall for all grades except for 5th to 6th, which was actually well above average, and 2nd to 3rd, which was also which actually was below average, though we switched tests in the K2 band to a separate test that no longer reads it to students. So we anticipate that challenge of reading some of the math questions versus having the ability to have the math questions read to you can significantly impact a child, especially when you're talking about a fall assessment where they haven't experienced that kind of test atmosphere before. And there were no substantive patterns across the grade levels in subscores. So each grade level's highest and lowest subscore was kind of all over the map, so we can't necessarily draw any curricular conclusions from looking at that. Again, we look at individual student growth and achievement, and we have made a decision as a curricular team to look at fluency and operations. Despite not seeing that in the subscores, we feel like looking at both the testing times and the way that students are approaching that test, that additional support in fluency and operational computation will assist them in increasing scores. This is kind of a new lens that we had not looked at prior to in Saco, and we pulled this data for the curriculum committee and felt like it was really interesting to share with the full board, even though we haven't done that in the past. What this shows is that for all students across all grade levels, if they started last fall in the 1st to 20th percentile, what percent of them met or exceeded their projected growth targets? And the patterns were pretty consistent across all grade levels. Even though these show average scores, it was pretty shocking to see how consistent this was at all grade levels. And really what this shows you is that we're doing a pretty exceptional job with our very lowest students, because we have well over 50% of them meeting or exceeding their growth targets. So that means that they are, if you were at 50%, that would be the norm. So anything above 50% is like above average in terms of making your growth. But then when we look to some of our higher percentile students, we aren't getting to that 50th percent mark of growing a year's growth in a year's time. So that kind of tells us, as we look at our good news is our intervention programs and our supports for struggling students are working really, really well. But we also need to make sure that we're paying attention to the full spectrum of students and making sure that there's enough challenging work for students who may be above grade level to continue to grow a year's growth in a year's time or more. That's all I have, but I'm certainly happy to answer any other specific questions about any of the slides.
Any questions for Assistant Superintendent Parkhurst? Anybody?
Yeah.
Oh, School Board Member Roach?
Hello. On that last point about the higher achieving students, that's been a little bit of an issue over the years. In middle school, you have the gifted and talented to address, but the spending, the budgets just aren't. That was like one class or like $100K to put it that. But yeah, that definitely focus is to get rising tide lifts all boats, but yeah, to expand that program to get those high achievers to the very, very top, and then that's definitely a priority too, I think, to see. I don't have an answer of what to do except resources, money, right? But
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have gifted and talented services for our 4th and 5th grade students as well, but when we're looking at those students or groups, we're talking about a very, very small percentage, probably less than 5%. So you're talking about like the 95th to 100th percentile for those kiddos. And I think it's a matter of really ensuring that our instruction is differentiating in the classroom for students that are struggling, as well as differentiating for students that already have that content. And it's also about looking at our curriculum and saying, if a student already knows how to do X, Y, and Z, what are we providing them to do instead? And is it a valuable use of that student's time to prove day over day that they already have that, or do we need to put some alternate programming in place with some pre-tests and that sort of thing to really push those students further?
couple questions on the COVID years. The standards are still from 2015, 2020. We're going into 2025. Do you think next year there'll be the year we'll have enough years from 2022 to 2025 as a standard, or?
Yeah, it's NWEA that puts out the normative data. So they do a huge study that the full study I think is like 200 and some odd pages with all their statistical end values and everything like that. So I think their intent was to do another 2020 to 2025 band, but I'm not sure that they'll do that because I think that they're concerned that some of the immediate post-COVID data might skew their averages.
Being statistical, I would just eliminate 2020 and 2021 and just go to. So it's a 5-year ban, though. They want 5 years.
Yep, they want 5 years, and so if they decide to do that, that would mean they would wait till 2027 to put out the new norms, but I haven't heard a release date on those posted anywhere.
When you have the yellow bars of the 52 to 59% as the median, the lowest grade was the current second grade. But going back to COVID years, the first and second graders in COVID would be now 5th and 6th. So it looks like those grades are doing pretty well. I feel like that, like 1st through 3rd, the formative years, that would affect your base skills, reading, math, and then, so it looks like that cohorts have done reasonably well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's interesting when you start to look at these scores that like our 4th graders weren't testing yet in COVID. So even though we have their scores now, it's not until you get up to the current 7th and 8th grade when you look at these graphs that you see that empty bar, that's the COVID year, and that was their 2nd and 3rd grade year respectively. So it doesn't feel that long ago to us, but in their like school age careers, it was quite a long time ago, and I think that you're right, there's some good news in terms of closing that gap for students that we've had since then time
Right.
to be able to make up some of that.
Last question. All right, this is a little bit sensitive, but the poverty and health effects for kids testing, and I want to talk individuals, but there might be two ways. I don't know if the testing, you guys capture this, but one is everyone gets free lunches, but some kids might be not having, say, breakfast. But my assumption is if they're going for breakfast too, that they might be on the more need scale. Is there any way to track like nutrition, that to test scores of who's taking the test? Is that involved at all?
We do still collect like socioeconomic status from families, even though it no longer qualifies families for free or reduced lunch. So we do have that data, and I could definitely share with the group like the average percentile of SES students versus average percentile of non-SES students. Statistically, that is the number one predictor. There's no teacher quality, what assessment you use, anything else, nothing is as predictive of student achievement as socioeconomic status, like statistically on a broad scale. So I would assume that we would see some of those same patterns, and we can definitely pull that out. Another pattern that Mandy over in Biddeford started looking at with their data that was pretty interesting, which we could look at as well, is the student test scores and the attendance rate. And there was a pretty strong correlation in that data between students who had like a chronic absenteeism, meaning 10% or more days out of school for whatever reason, doesn't matter if it's because you're truly sick. If you're not in school, you're missing that instruction, and that missed instruction did correlate with lower achievement scores and lower growth scores.
And then we do have two schools for K through 2. Mm-hmm. And this is not to compare the performance of the schools. I don't want Jeff and Wendy fighting here, but Fairfield, I think, has a higher rate of poverty of kids going to Fairfield than Young. So do you do that comparison? Again, not to compare for the schools, but compare for income situations, achievement of the test scores.
If we were to look at it and present it, I would probably do it for grade levels as a whole, not by school. But I think that they're fairly close in terms of their achievement. I won't say who's slightly above because I don't want anything to break out behind me. But it's probably not within the margin of error of the test score. It's like a point or two in terms of the average score per grade level.
Okay.
In terms of differences between those two schools, despite the fact that the free and reduced lunch or socioeconomic status qualification number is substantially different in both of those schools.
Yeah, we just talk a lot about supportive households, poverty rates, nutrition, the whole 9 yards. So now we get test scores, the correlation. That's what interested in. Yeah. Okay.
And just to jump in, I would find that being very interesting to look at on a smaller level because strategies may be different that you use in schools or programming or pieces. But like one of the things that Meg talked about, and I think this is a testament to our staff and to our teachers and to our, community as a whole, is that when you look at the growth piece of percentiles of a couple of points back in 2018, they were like above. We are a very different community than 2018 that has had substantial change in the socioeconomic status, homeless status, ELL status, experience of COVID. That I think that when you look at the work that our teachers and staff are doing, hope that the Tepuhoy could be is, you've got different factors, and they're doing a fantastic job with those pieces, combating some of those factors. The piece that's, the other piece, Kevin, I think is, you could spend a lot of time just talking about options, is that when you go back to Meg's graph about, the different achievement levels and where there is growth throughout those, and you talked about gifted and talented or money for program, I also think that, and again, this will be a personal opinion that I tend to wonder about at times, is does the structural makeup of our schools combined with the changing demographics in a classroom make it very tough on a teacher to manage the different levels that are within that classroom. And so that structural grade level piece sometimes gets in the way of doing other things that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a different program or spend additional funds, but can you imagine your organizational structure being a bit different in order to meet some of those needs? And, a larger school may handle it in one way, a smaller school may handle that in a different way, but I think those can be fun conversations to see what can you do for a kiddo. When I grew up in a very small one grade level school, you took math, and if you did really well in math, you might have gone to the next grade level, and if you were in 8th grade, you were lucky enough to have algebra with the principal in their office. And so I think that structurally we have to think about some things and have those conversations, because the job of a teacher can be so challenging with all of the different levels and needs coming at them. Do we have an ability to give ourselves permission to do something a little bit differently to allow some of that alignment in skill set or interest to occur?
Maybe it's for the older grades, but, it's public school, all for one, can, gifted and talented kids with the kids that, are coming in new or struggling or English second language or whatever. Is there kind of like putting them together as is there a mentoring where kids together can one kid can feed off another kid? With these different challenges now, we're still a public school, so I don't want too much segregation of resources, but you still got to get a classroom taught for the day and all that. Yeah.
And I think the key with that is when we come up with creative solutions or different things to differentiate, is it flexible enough that kids have opportunity to move when they do or don't get something in the next unit? Like, we don't want kids stuck in one track or another or not able to access a track. And then I think the second thing to consider about that is just, are we making sure that if we are separating kids or moving kids around, that there is more support for kids that are lower? So we're not just going to split kids up and do the same thing for each group. We either need more time, a different teaching style, or a lower number of students for a group of students that is struggling. And I think that's what we're seeing with kids in our 1st to 40th percentile, is that they're getting that additional time through other supports. And maybe we need to think about how to be more creative on that with the other end.
Any other questions? All right, moving on then to item D, transportation update. Superintendent Ray?
Okay, just wanted to continue to keep that transportation piece on the front burner for us, as we know that we were able to solicit some feedback from parents and community members who brought some ideas to us. And certainly as a school committee, you took some actions of some short-term pieces based off some of the recommendations and suggestions of ordering a couple of vans and trying to get them into play to look at solving some of the longer runs and students getting on time, which happy to report that one of those was delivered yesterday. So now we have to get it into play, and the second van should come after the holidays. But we also went and started looking at the data that's in BusRight, and, you know, working with the company, we found some very interesting data, and I want to walk through the current situation. And Meg, feel free to jump up too, as you're a big part of this. When you look at the total number of stops that we have, and we talk about stops, and then you talk about students, I want to kind of explain that. And Carolyn asked me a good question today about that, just because that seems like, well, you have more stops than students. So students are counted as one, meaning that each student that is on that list of the 2357 is someone who says they may take a bus or has been assigned a bus route. That would eliminate anyone who's a walker from that, or someone who just has said, hey, look, I'm never taking the bus. We have kiddos, and the example I gave Carolyn is my own kiddos, who probably they're assigned a bus route and a stop, but tend to hardly ever ride the bus unless it's weather like today for my high schooler, and then he's still got somebody to take him to school, or my daughter, who may only take it on the way home, let's say. When we look at the number of stops, that is not per afternoon or morning, that is combined. And so when the other piece that makes that number high is there may be families who have split households that would have a stop on some weeks in the morning time and afternoon time, and different stops on another morning, another day, morning and after school. That includes students who may go to a daycare some days, and after school on another. That includes Parks and Rec. So there's a whole lot of information in that stop piece. So it's a bit of a confusing information. When we look at distance, this is an interesting one, that looking at their primary student's home address, 27% of our students are picked up under 1/10 of a mile from their, or 0 miles from their home. And that means that there's different parts of town that have different needs in them. If you're in places like some of North Saco, that's going to be a pickup right at your front door because there is no sidewalk, or it's a long distance, and you're not going to have somebody walk a 1/4 of a mile when the bus stop doesn't stop for a mile. You just make the one stop at the house. You also have different age groups of students that we program differently for, that the walking distance for a pre-K kid looks a lot different than it may be for a 5th grade student. A majority of our students are under a 1/4 of a mile, 68%, and then 5% of our students are within that 1/4 of a mile to a 1/2 mile walk. And so that is something that we'll look at. Stop locations. Meg, I need you to explain that piece a little bit more for us.
I think this in hindsight, could have organized this better, because the stop location measurement aligns with that total stops of the AM/PM 2,568, whereas the stop distance analysis is the distance per student, if that makes sense.
Say that again, Meg.
Okay, so total stops is 2,568, and if you look at stop location measurement, 16% of stops are a 0 mile walk for the students at the stop. 70% of stops include a 0.01 to 0.24 mile walk for the students at that stop, and 14% of stops require a quarter mile or more for the students that go to that stop. The stop distance is for the individual students, how far each student is walking to their stop versus the stop and where students have come from to that stop.
Totally clear, right?
It made sense to me.
Crystal.
I got it, crystal clear, yeah.
So, yeah, 5% of the students are utilizing 14% of that distance stop. So even though 14% is over a quarter mile, only 5% of students are affected. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you boil it down more and you get the information, you basically, I thought the other piece is, the next one is that 40% of transported students are picked up, dropped off within 105 feet of their address. That's pretty close. That's pretty good service for the most part of it. And then we look at this data and we take all the feedback about late times, traffic, safety, and all of those pieces. And, Meg and I wanted to kind of talk about like how we would see this review process continuing to play out. One of that, part of that process would be creating like a sandbox route, a duplicate route system, where we would say, okay, here's all of our existing students. And if we really 100% followed our policy on walking distance and going into cul-de-sacs or doing those things, what would it look like for people? Because I think that's an important picture to paint for a school committee and for the public to fully understand that while a lot of the suggestions would be combining routes, changing the walking distances, etc., until you see where your child or your neighbor's kids or wherever is at, how that affects, that's when you're really going to get feedback about any changes you have on your policy. And what we don't want to create is a situation where it is September 5th, no communication has been put out of what this would look like, and we're having a school committee meeting, and we have a lot of people who now are very passionate about where their bus stop is or their ride time that might be very different than the feedback you got, because it's easy to say, have kids walk longer, don't go here, worry about traffic, let's see what the impacts are going to be. So what we want to do is, based off the current situation, is create that sandbox, provide it some of those mathematical rules, then also look at the situation where what it may create for routes and or timing. I suspect that our drivers and our transportation director now have some real world application to put to a route. An example being a GPS map and routing sophomore may say to go down this street, but our transportation director may say, you know what, in the snow, I know we can't go in that direction because it is more dangerous. Or we know that we can't easily have the bus take a right turn off this small street because of whatever. So looking at that sandbox, looking at each individual route, and then taking our real world evidence and experience into play to say, no, the stop can't be here because of X, and adjusting that situation and seeing what our timing is, while on top of it, then saying, and that is, okay, you have a result, then you could say, okay, what does this look like if the walking distance is slightly shortened and or expanded at each grade level? What does it look like if you added another route into the situation? If we have the ability to use a couple of vans in situations, a computer program can tell us that, but also relying on Jeannie to say, no, this is more effective if we do this, and run some of those options so that by springtime, we're able to generate what that may look like for a family and have that discussion this spring that we can present to you, get to the public, and before you make any final decisions. Because we don't want to start the school year with anyone feeling like this was a surprise. That sound like a reasonable process to you guys?
I think it'd be helpful to have a little bit more data as far as like number of buses, like the exact routes that they're taking, and just be able to see, a more thorough kind of picture of everything.
Yeah, and I think that we'll be able to, theoretically, we should be able to even present that information that's out there as like bus routes would be this. I think there are also, some considerations that you as a board have to understand is that you may have a more efficient model based off the data from a GPS or whatever that could change the historical route process, which means that if you are a parent of an 8th grader and you've only had bus driver Jeremy for all of those years, and you also have a 5th grader who's only had bus driver Jeremy, and you have this awesome relationship with them, that there may be a routing system or a passage that says, hey, that family doesn't have that driver anymore because it makes it more efficient or timing better to do something. And I think there's that human piece that you also have to factor into the amount of change, because I can remember having the same bus driver forever, all of my years of school, and I'm 48 years old, and when I still go home, I can run into her into the store, and that's an interesting relationship that you have with the person that welcomes you and, puts you off the bus at the end of the day. And so we can present all that information, and I think that probably when we get to that point, we're going to need to either have some discussions in a transportation committee or subgroup or whatever to comb through some of those pieces, and also understanding that in addition to just not only the knowledge that Jeannie has, that there are certain things that there are going to be safety pieces that people say, no, we don't want to pick you up at this time because we know it's just not safe to have you cross this street. We want to pick you up on the bus side of things. Those are some pieces that we've got to look at, and actually feel like we have a fairly decent time frame leading up to this. We're doing some good work with that piece. We're hoping to hire that other dispatch person in the transportation office and have somebody with some capacity to work these runs instead of, Jeannie and Felicia are over there trying to work on this, and the bus, the phone ringing every 30 seconds, and oh, by the way, we're short a couple of drivers, and so I got to get back on, and I can't get finished again. I hope this person can bring some of the skills to do some of that work for us and train them up, and we can present you with solutions that may or may not have budgetary impact throughout the process.
One other quick question is, if you're on Bus Right, that's just software, are you able to see basically 30,000-foot view of everything that's happening in real time, or?
We have it up on the
Yeah.
screen.
So actually, in my office or outside my office is a television screen. That this is one of the things that we did just recently. Is we have it split screen. I have Biddeford on one side of the screen, and I have Saco at the other side of the screen, so that we can watch buses, or if someone gives a call, we can hover over that and find out exactly where bus 731 is at that any given time in either of our districts. And as a parent where I say, if you haven't signed up for Bus Right, a morning like yesterday, and it's technology, so there are still some glitches with Bus Right. Don't, you still have to turn on the iPad every single time. And sometimes you'll get a lag on cell service a little bit. But we'll get a lot of questions on a 2-hour delay of what time should it be, and theoretically it's going to be 2 hours later than before, but roads and traffic and some of those things, patterns change. And if I'm a parent and I'm logged in, I can just watch how close that bus is going to be to my stop and then yell to the kids, hey, time to get out there. And I think what's more remarkable about it is when you look at your phone and you look at the stop, it's jives right up perfectly.
You can see all the buses, right? Like, inside
We can see all the buses.
But a parent would be limited to just their bus.
Parent is looking at your ride and your ride only.
I think it'd be helpful for the board if we had access to be able to see what you see for added context as far as, what the current route is and then kind of what you're looking to do in the future.
I think we will be able to set that up for us as we move through this process this spring.
School Board Member Johnston. Excuse me.
Thank you. I find this to be actually fascinating. In the several years that I've been on this board, there has never been, I don't think, anywhere near this kind of attention and research on how this bus system actually works. We've generally heard good things about it in the past, and I know that we're in a circumstance now where it's become more urgent in a sense because bus drivers are hard to get, and certainly having the technology for parents to be able to follow where their child's bus is fantastic, even though technology does have its glitches. But I think as a board, it certainly, as I think everyone here thinks, it certainly educates us about the effectiveness of the system. And as you, Mr. Superintendent, have just said, riding a bus to school and home, whether you're going to one place at the beginning and back to another, is a very probably important part of a child's experience. So I really am very excited that we're doing it. I'm very excited that we're not done. We're going to continue on and see if we can refine it all the more. So I just wanted to say I very much am enthusiastic about this, and I think that as a board we'll be able to make better decisions with this information as it continues to come to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, and I do think that one of the things that you guys as a board need to be proud of is that you are starting to help provide the resources for us to do this work, meaning the additional person in the office, because the job of transportation director is a challenge without having to drive the bus every morning and afternoon time. We know that staffing is more challenging, and the ability that the program keeps adding to it is even more remarkable. Whereas I can remember times where I've had, over the course of my career, where I've had a parent complain about, or not complain, but want me to come see, like, hey, this is not a great bus stop location. And the example being that now I'm in my car, I drive out, I meet to the parents, I like to put my eyes on it, get some information, whereas now through Bus Right, if we want to look at a stop, I can click on the student and it automatically goes to Google Earth. It goes to the maps and I can have a street view of everything before I ever go there, when I know that it could be that the reason the stop is not somewhere is because there's a crosswalk or a stoplight or a big intersection, and that allows Jeannie and the people in the office to do such a better job of trying to evaluate those things. I'm hopeful that this will give us even more data and better command of this. And You know, will we be able to solve every problem through this? No, because we know that we have the driver shortage problem. And bus routes, what, you know, sometimes the public doesn't understand always, is that when you think about what we're asking bus drivers to do every single day, while at the same time knowing that those routes may change at least once a week because there's a new kiddo here or a kiddo not here, or, you know, you've got to go down this little road now because you've got a new kindergartner on that bus. Those are actually pretty amazing feats that you pull off over a course of a school year in a community. So it will be a fun thing to see where we get to using all of those different factors with the knowledge of our transportation and bus drivers to see if we can fix, I won't say fix, improve upon a very challenging situation. And then also how we leverage that during times when we have sickness or other things out. I think that's the biggest challenge one, is when we're covering runs, how do we possibly combine runs and be able to push that information out faster to families to say, today may look a little bit difficult, because one of the things that I'm pretty proud of here in all of our school departments is that in many of the surrounding areas, a parent gets a phone call and says, a bus just isn't showing up today. Good luck. We haven't had to do that. And that's what, you know, I guess I much prefer a kiddo 15 minutes late than sending a message that says, hey, sorry, fend for yourself today. And I know that in talking with many of our superintendent friends who are, you know, have big, sprawling rural areas, that is the norm, because you can't just shift a bus a couple of streets to pick up a few kids because it's a 45-minute ride somewhere. So pretty proud of Jeannie and the crew of trying to do those pieces to solve those problems.
Any further questions for Superintendent Ray or Parkhurst?
I just wanted to add one more thing that I think I wanted to congratulate Mike Lynch, who's a new driver that got his CDL license last week under the direction of our veteran bus driver, Jess, who has been training new drivers. So that's other promising news in this same arena.
Congratulations. All right. Any other questions on transportation? All right. Seeing that we have discussed that, we'll move on to item E, which is a budget timeline. Superintendent Ray?
Yes, this is just a timeline for you guys to start thinking in your calendar of where we would be budgetarily, of what the benchmarks we will try to hit throughout our process. The week of January 13th through the 20th is my goal to be able to review budgets with principals and directors on kind of the superintendent's level of those questions of where we're at, what's the expenditures. Hopefully by that time we'll have them done and I will have the ability to have reviewed all of those so we can talk line by line about where we stand. During January 20th to 29th, that's when the meetings with administrators will be. The 13th through 20th will be more my office, kind of level with Meg, business manager, those types of things. January 31st is when I should be getting the DOE subsidy reports. Statute says that that's the time that they come out. And so once I have those state subsidy projections, I'll review those with the business manager, our office. That would be about the time when you, within the next week or so, Finance Committee could expect the big binder budget. I don't like to put out the budget before I know the subsidy. And the reason being is that if there's bad news or whatever, I'm not one that wants to put out a budget that gets everybody worked up thinking that we have a 15% budget increase, let's say, as an example, we need to refine that a little bit more in our office to think so that something that we're presenting to the finance committee doesn't have this task that's so great in front of it. And we would come with recommendations to the finance to say, hey, we've made these adjustments. On February 12th will be the favorite night, one of my favorite nights of the year, because I get to go through, you laugh, Meg, but it's a pretty exciting night for me. When I get to go through the subsidy report for everybody and really explain how that's going, that's always a highlight for me. It's kind of like the superintendent's Super Bowl.
You present it well, I just
sorry,
have to
it's my-
say. You make it very consumable,
It's my Super Bowl night. So
palatable.
that will be on February 12th. And then when we come back from our our February vacation, we'll line up our reviews based off where we're at with the principals and directors to talk about how we got to where we are, what do we think some of our needs are, what are some priorities. Scheduled for the 16th, I believe it is.
I think it's the 17th.
Yeah, I think that's
16th is Sunday.
Sunday, so that's the 17th. We will be, that's the presentation to City Council on that Monday night. Last year with the City Council in the past, they had a presentation of, I think 2 years ago, or, for a couple of years, we had done the city and the school at the same night. And boy, that's a lot of information for somebody. And so last year, in speaking with John, we were able to divide that up into one night being a city council, the city budget going through, and then the next time, or vice versa, it would be the school committee on a separate night. So we're scheduled for the 17th to give that overview to them. Then in early April is when we tend to understand and get the information about what health insurance will look like. Sometimes that can be the last week of March that will say your band will be between this percentage, and then they'll send out the official document, which can either lead to an adjustment in either way. I know that we're going to put at a minimum 10% of an increase for health insurance in our budget, just based off experience rating. And then on April 9th is a tentative review at our school committee meeting to take kind of that final vote on the budget that night. That's what we're looking at from a timeline. Now, certainly this could be adjusted, but just that kind of plays out where we would be this spring moving forward. So take any questions on that.
School Board Member Roach?
Yeah, Jeremy, you get all geeked up about ED 279, but yeah, Meg explained 3 times on the buses, so let's go. Hey, no, a quick question. Matt, for TA at private schools, that's usually in December, right?
It's in December. I didn't check today. That hasn't been out yet, is it, Anne Marie? Probably be the 20th, right? When we all go. So I haven't seen that piece yet. During this I'll pull it up right now and just see if there's any updates on that screen. But it hasn't come out, and usually once that comes out, people are talking pretty quickly. So haven't got that yet.
Okay. No, that's like kind of the unofficial start of the budget season, right? Yeah.
All right, any other questions for Superintendent Ray on the budget timeline? All right, moving on to item F, Educate Maine Workforce Study Executive Summary. Superintendent Ray?
Yeah, so the other day, Educate Maine's a nonprofit that is many of us are business leaders that talk about some of the challenges that we have and some of the solutions that they see in the state around educational issues. And they provided a 57-page report that I linked in there that if you want to have certain, have some time that you can read that, it would be great. But what I wanted to do is just, I think that this provides us a level of information for board to think about the hiring workforce and some of the challenges that we face. And many of those are challenges that I think we all would expect, or would have talked about or have talked about over time, meaning that their report talks about some of their key findings being as simple as declining enrollments in teacher preparatory schools of people going into the field. It talked about low pay, stress, lack of support being major factors. And then also how difficult it can be for people who are either from out of state or changing professions to get certified in the state of Maine, and what some of those barriers may be, whether that's the cost of higher education or the time and the pathways that we have for people to move in through that. It talked about what some of the strong attractions are to the education field, about sense of community, quality of life, stable benefits being something that's a win. But then it also talks about what some of the things that we have had conversation about is high cost of living, housing affordability. And when we're looking to attract people to Saco or to this area, we have some challenges that are different from other parts of the state, while they have some challenges that are very different from ours. In the rural areas, it's about how do I find someone who wants to come and live here at this salary, find housing, and teach art. That can be a very difficult thing for some of those schools. I know that some of my colleagues in the rural part of Washington County who have gone years without a certified art teacher in their districts, and that's just finding one person. I think we also look at, when we talk about pay, and that here we may be slightly higher or lower than a neighboring community, but we might be better than a community that's a 45-minute drive. You have people who think about, well, do I really want to make that drive of spending an hour and a half in the car every day? This wouldn't have been a fun morning to make that commute. And so those are limiting factors for us. And then we had, we send out staff to job fairs every single year at some of the local colleges and universities. And when you talk about affordability, last year, one of the college students looked at Assistant Superintendent Hindorf and said, why would I want to come to Biddeford and Saco, where I just am finally moving out of college and having roommates, to move into a place where I probably need to have additional roommates than I currently have to afford houses, when I can go to an area and I can take the same amount of money and probably within a year of savings think about purchasing a house versus paying rent. That's kind of a big factor, because when you think about the state's conversation about minimum salary, and they talk about $40,000 minimum is what it is now, and they talked in the last session about moving that to a $50,000 salary. That $50,000 is very different in Saco, Maine, than it is in Cherryfield, Maine. It's a very different cost of living. And so, I've encouraged that if we go down that bird walk again, or if that continues, that there has to be some factor in there around regional price index, whether that be around homes or expenses. And there's some data that we use actually in the 279 where we get some regional benefit for certain costs. So that needs to go into that. So again, I thought it was just an interesting report to share with you guys, giving you guys an overview, and what some of the strategies might be for districts or for the state to look at as we continue in through hiring, and how we make sure that we have top quality teachers in the area working with our kiddos, and how we can bring more people into the profession through different certification roles.
Any questions for Superintendent Ray? School Board Member Roach?
It happens in the cities and different industries, but with teachers coming out of school, you mentioned the housing, could there be some sort of program of apartment dorms that link up, dorm style, where they link up young teachers for roommates and I don't know if Saco is big enough for that, or Saco Biddeford combined, or.
Well, I think that could 100% happen. I think one of the things that municipalities are going to have to face, and this isn't just for your educators, but this may be for police, fire, public works, is that we are going to have a greater conversation about workforce housing within our municipalities. There are some districts out there, especially in other states, that have workforce housing for their teachers. Camden is going through a project right now where they're working on some housing for teachers. That needs to be something that we talk about here and what that avenue to do that. And it doesn't mean that you're building 100 apartments or something, but are there opportunities to chip away at that? Because Chief Clements has the same problem that we have as recruiting police officers into the city, because some of it becomes around the cost of living. And I think the other piece that when you look at the report and you talk about like sense of community, that teachers want to be part of their community, there was a time that I suspect not too long ago that a much higher percentage of our educational workforce lived in the city that they taught in. And I think that's changed over time based off housing piece. We can't expect any teacher coming in at $43,000 to purchase a house even close at the beginning without some, it's just not possible. Can't expect our administrators to do that. So I think as a municipality, we need to look at what could be some initial ways to wade into that piece. And I think that that would be something I'd be pretty excited about, because I actually can think of a property that I'd love to try that with, if that was a goal of the school committee or whatnot. And again, we're not going to solve the problem, but we might be able to make take that step.
Well, what happens is the kids that are coming out of school, ed tech teachers, that they're gonna teach in their hometown and live at home. They just won't. You won't be able to. It'll be tough to recruit from somewhere outside, because they're just not going to move here. They can't afford. So, but we'll keep hopefully the kids that grew up here, that they will teach here though.
And I think what was an interesting piece is, I think it was 2 cycles ago, and it was Chris and Shelley and I think Jess Clark went, and we went to a job fair in Boston to think about the diversity factor and saying, okay, well, maybe we can pull graduates from those schools this way. And one of the things, Kevin, is that was the same situation where they said, why would we go north for a higher cost of living than many of those students saying, we're trying to move out of the Northeast to warmer weather and a lower cost of housing and living. And I think that's the challenge that we face here, and will continue to face until we do something about that workforce housing for us, to chip away at that, or some sort of other incentive package for someone to be here.
Just one more thing. I'm going to use this bully pulpit. It's a little bit outside the school, but you mentioned workforce housing. We had set up workforce housing down on Saco Island, and that group wasn't enforced. There was, tax incentives and all that, but they charged market rate in the end. It was meant for service workers. So any talk about workforce housing, this city needs to enforce, even have rent controls or whatever, because they're going to take advantage. The developers take advantage, and maybe he'll take the schools and a teacher initiative to enforce that stuff. That place went bankrupt last week, and it's a horror show. And so this city needs to pay attention a lot closer to what they're promising in the efforts of workforce housing. And anyway, that's my bully pulpit for today.
Any other questions for Superintendent Ray? All right. Moving on to item G, elementary school construction update. Superintendent Ray?
So there's a lot of things that go on every couple of weeks that we meet with, but the biggest piece that I want to talk to you about, and I want to thank the city manager for a quick response of trying to help us work through a challenge that we have right now, is that it was our hope to clear the trees on that spot this winter. That's what we were moving for, and we got information about ordinance in the cities, the DEP, and the Army Corps of Engineers, and some information about a possible bat study that needs to be done if you cannot cut the trees by April 14th, because on the 15th, the rule changes. And essentially it means that if we can't get some of this land cleared through this process, we possibly would have to wait until November 1st to do any of the tree cutting, which our hope was that we would be already starting our construction by sometime August, September was the hope. So that puts a delay. And I do want to, I want to thank John, because I was able to connect with John this morning, and he's very attentive and got back to me, and we're hoping to figure out a path forward on this so that we can get this moving, because ideally, like anyone who's, I don't know if people have much have had land cut for trees and stuff, like ideally frozen ground is the way to do a lot of that. We don't want to be out there in the middle of the summer doing that, or in the spring season. And we're also trying to avoid another costly study that could happen to come our way. So that's kind of been like the big thing we've been working on for the last week. And again, great support here in the conversations that I was able to have today with John and Emily's staff to help us try to get through what would be a pathway to do some of this. And so Jonah and the team at Oak Point will move down that piece. And so that's been the big stuff that we've spent the last week on. I know April and Wendy and Meg have spent some more time on exteriors and playgrounds, and having, again, trying to work with just another conversation that is important to us was being able to work with Don Roth over the last couple of weeks to say, okay, what equipment do we have out there for snow removal so that when we design walking paths, it's going to be appropriate for the equipment that we're going to have. So just kind of doing a lot of that stuff right now, and hoping that we can work with the loggers and work with everybody involved before April 15th.
School Board Member Kevin Roach.
Oh, I'm unfamiliar now? So you're not going to do like developers do in the city and just cut them down and beg for forgiveness later?
Well, that was my initial thought. We were just going to, but no, we're going to work through the process on this one.
Oh, all right. No, that's good. That's good. That's good. See, we're nice here on the school board. We're nice. So, but not to put well, you right now, but not to put John on the spot, but I mean, they should just get it in front of city council and make the change or make something happen there, so.
Yeah, I think we're putting in, working with John and Emily to get everything that we need for them to be supportive of this. Again, not sure that a lot of people have necessarily dealt with this exact scenario. And again, I certainly understand why a city might not want 500 acres of land clear cut before site plans are done. But this is a situation where we know where the school's going, our voters have approved it, the state has approved it, all of those good things. And they're gonna help us through the process, and it's just great to be able to have that relationship with everybody over here.
School Board Member Truman?
I just wanted to say that we thought vernal pools were an issue. Now we got bats. So.
Any other questions for Superintendent Ray? Okay, moving on to item H, which is BDA organizational meeting election of chair and vice chair. Do we have a motion for any nominations for chair or vice chair? School Board Member Johnston?
Thank you, Chair Preble. I would like to nominate Jennifer Preble for chairperson of the Saco School Board.
I have a motion by School Board Member Johnston to elect Jennifer Preble for School Board Chair, and for Vice Chair, School Board Member, did I hear, help me out, Beth, I'm a little sleepy this evening.
I actually only nominated.
Only one, okay, sorry.
The chair.
Separate votes, okay, yep. So I have a motion on the table to elect Jennifer Preble for School Board Chair. Is there a second?
Second.
If I heard correctly, second for School Board Member Kidder. Very good. Any discussion on this? Seeing there's no discussion, is there any other nominations before roll call vote or any other discussion? Oh, say it again. I'm
We have to
sorry.
do roll call on this first.
Okay, roll call vote. School Board Member Warnoff.
Approve.
School Board Member Richards.
Yes.
I am going to abstain. School Board Member Roach.
Yes.
School Board Member Kidder.
Yes.
School Board Member Truman.
Yes.
School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Roll call vote passes with a 6 with 1 abstention. Do I have a motion for any nominations for Vice Chair? School Board Member Johnston?
Thank you. I would like to nominate Sarah Truman for Vice Chair of the Saco School Board.
I have a motion on the table by School Board Member Johnston to nominate Sarah Truman for Vice Chair for the Saco School Board. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff Richards. Any discussion on Vice Chair nomination? Seeing that there's no recognition, we'll move on to roll call vote. School Board Member Warnoff?
Yes.
School Board Member Richards?
Yes.
I vote yes. School Board Member Roach?
Yes.
School Board Member Kidder?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes for Sarah Truman for Vice Chair by 7-0.
You see, she voted for herself. You
Oh,
did.
You can vote for yourself.
Come on.
Neutral, okay.
Self-confidence.
I checked last time. I was like, I can vote for me, right?
All right.
Sarah's just trying to run up the score.
Oh, okay. Moving on to item I, which is BDE Committee of Assignment of Committees. I have a proposed committee assignment that I had worked on and reached out to other school board members. Is there a motion to, I guess I can read through them and then we can make a motion?
Do we need to make motions on that, or I think you can
Or
just
is it just
assign?
me reading it out?
I think you can just assign them. Yeah, you just assign them.
Okay.
You're the boss.
All right, so going into that, I just couldn't remember if there was a motion or not, because I'm a little rusty at it. Looking at policy and personnel and negotiations, I have Carolyn, Beth, and Sarah. For Finance and Infrastructure Committee, I have Kevin Roach, April Kidder, and Jeff Richards. For Curriculum Committee, I am looking for Beth, April, and Sarah. For the liaisons, for Wellness, Jennifer and Beth. For PG&E, Jennifer and Beth. Dropout Committee, Prevention Committee, we are looking at April and Carolyn. Stipend Committee, Sarah and Kevin. And for Calendar Committee, April and Sarah. Any questions or changes we should make with assignments for committees and liaisons? Or discussion? Open it up for discussion.
Who'd you put on dropout?
Dropout, did I read it incorrectly? Oh, I apologize. Carolyn and April is who I'd had. I had a miscalculation.
No, I just couldn't write fast enough, that's all.
Yep. Any questions or changes or feedback, discussion? Okay. Oh, School Board Member Johnston?
Just one suggestion, I think, which is that maybe if you send out that on email form so that we all are clear of where everybody is, and even if it's not us personally, but at least we know who's on another committee.
Okay. I can absolutely work on that. All right, we will get that out in an email, update the spreadsheet. Meg's gonna send it out. Okay. Perfect. All right, we got that organized. All right, moving on to item J. Bear with me, my iPad. First reading of policies. Item A, JKE, expulsions of students. Do I have a motion? School Board Member Johnston?
I move we approve the first reading of policy JKE, expulsion of students.
Second.
I have a motion by School Board Member Johnston with a second by School Board Member Truman. Any discussion on the policy of expulsion of students? Okay. Moving on to a roll call vote. School Board Member Warnoff?
Yes.
School Board Member Richards?
Yes.
I vote yes. School Board Member Roach?
Yes.
School Board Member Kidder?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yep.
School Board Member Johnston?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Item 13, there is no other information this evening, unless anybody's received anything that we're not aware of. Okay, moving on to item 14, which is executive session. There is nothing listed this evening, so we can move on to item 15, which is adjournment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
By School Board Member Truman. And do I have a second?
Second.
I heard by Jeff and almost Beth. All right, I would assume no discussion on adjournment, so I will go for roll call vote. School Board Member Warnoff.
Yes.
School Board Member Richards.
Yes.
I vote yes. School Board Member Roach.
It's just a box of rain tonight. Yes.
I do enjoy some rain. How about School Board Member Kidder?
Yes.
School Board Member Truman?
Yes.
And School Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0 to adjourn at 8:38 p.m. Awesome. Have a great evening, everyone, and take care.